My name is Tristan Duke, and I'm an artist based in Los Angeles. And we are at the Kunst Haus in Vienna, the Hundertwasser Museum. And I'm here for the opening of the mining photography exhibition, where I have some works made with a collective that I'm a part of with two other artists, Lauren Bond and Richard Nielsen. The works that we have in this show are some of our lakebed developed works, and this is a process that we've been doing since around 2012, 2013, developing photographs using a naturally occurring brine pool in the Owens Valley of California. So this is a landscape-based or nature-based photochemical process. This work actually emerged out of a kind of larger quest to try to reinvent photography as a land-based practice. And we started with mining all of the materials to make our own photographic materials out of the landscape. So mining silver, collecting bones from local cattle to make our own gelatin, collecting salts from the landscape to make actual photo materials. So this idea was to try to make a literal landscape photograph, a photograph of the landscape made out of that landscape. And so once we started to assemble all the materials for the film, we started thinking, well, we should also try to make the developing chemistry out of the landscape as well. It turns out that actually developer, the first chemical in the process, is actually quite easy. There's a lot of natural materials that will develop film, including a lot of flower essences, so you can make a tea out of wildflowers, or you can collect pine needles, which have a lot of vitamin C, which ascorbic acid makes for a very good developer. So we were able to make a lot of really great developers out of mostly plant materials found in the landscape. But the fixer really was the tricky part, because fixer, for people who don't know the photo process very well, fixer is kind of arguably the most important part of the process, because it's what renders the image permanent. It's what makes the film no longer sensitive to light. And there's really only a couple chemical formulas that do this job. It's sodium thiosulfate is the main chemical that fixes film, and it's a chemical reaction. So nothing else really will do. So you have to find that in nature. We started talking to scientists and researching, and the answer we kept getting back is no, you will never find that in the quantities you need. You will never find it in nature because it oxidizes quite readily. It's an unstable compound. It just won't exist. But because we're artists, we were actually okay to go on a fool's errand, and we thought, well, we're going to go and test for it anyways, and even if it's like ends up being this kind of like this quest where we don't find it, we will take pictures and document the process, and it'll be kind of a performative artist action to be looking for this in the landscape. But then we actually accidentally did find it, and it turns out the reason that it can exist where everybody thought that it couldn't is because this particular brine pool that we found is teeming with extremophile bacteria. So these are organisms that can live in really harsh, extreme conditions, and they have really unusual evolutionary adaptations. So in this case, these particular organisms metabolize sulfur, and so their biological metabolism actually breaks down sulfur and generates these thiosulfates that react with the film. So this was kind of a very unexpected discovery. This, of course, is not a Kodak chemistry, so it's not exactly fixer. It's doing things like Fixer, but of course there's many other compounds and all sorts of elements involved. And so this feral, wild process yields not just clean Kodak printing, but it renders the prints with muddy swirls of chemical reactions, or sometimes silver metallic tones or iridescent colors. It's totally unpredictable depending on the weather. If it's been raining or the sun is shining, those bacteria are doing different things. And so we get actually a huge variety. There's no two sessions are the same. When we go out, it's always a surprise. And the process that we have developed, so we work in really large-scale photography. We both shoot really large negatives, about 1 meter by almost 3 meter negatives, and then we contact print those. So we are taking these gigantic prints, and we have to lay them into the lake bed, and the only way to do that is to actually use the night as our darkroom. So we go out on a new moon when the moon is gone, and we bury the prints by night. And then we wake up the next morning, we have a breakfast and some coffee, and then we head out onto the lake bed, and that's when we can unveil what the microbes, what the bacteria have done over the night.
Is this also the social practice that you were referring to? Like that it's a collective process that you cannot do on your own if you wanted to get done?
Yeah, I mean, this is... part of our collective practice is you're getting the sense the artwork is as much the finished prints as it is the action and the activity of doing this. So we go out on this lake bed, and it's such a beautiful kind of transcendent aesthetic experience to be just with the Milky Way above, because it's a very remote area. You can see all the stars, and we're just unfurling this photo paper into this primordial soup of photochemistry.
I love the idea that sort of the nature decides in a way how it wants to be depicted, and this is how it creates its own image.
Exactly.
Like bacteria. This is just an amazing process, and also that you can, like, as you said, all the images look differently. You have all this irisation and different surfaces and organical qualities to it. This is really amazing.
Yeah, and in that way, you're exactly right. And in that way, so if we take a photograph of the Owens Valley, this landscape, so we have an optical image that's recorded, and then we develop that photograph of the Owens Valley in its own lake bed. Then we have a chemical trace, a chemical image that's also recorded. So in some ways it's a double exposure. It's two images in one. That idea of a self-portrait of the landscape is definitely key. We still get something like 40% of our drinking water from the Owens Valley. So in 1913, an engineer named William Mulholland built the Los Angeles Aqueduct. This is a 250-mile pipeline that diverts all of the water sources away from the Owens Valley and into Los Angeles. And as a result of this feat of engineering, what was once a gigantic lake filling the Owens Valley is now a desiccated, dry lake bed. And this has caused a huge environmental disaster because when a lake dies, when a lake dries up, normally that happens over, glacial timescales. And when a lake dries up naturally, it forms what's called a playa. It's like a cement-like salt barrier that caps the lake, and there's a whole process of the lake sort of drying up. In this case, instead of taking hundreds or thousands of years to dry up, the lake bed was dried over the course of a decade or 2 decades. And this means that it's really like an open scar, and all of the sediment from, this ancient lake is exposed to the elements. And it's not only the natural sediments, but it's also all of the legacy of mining in the area. So Union Carbide, there's many, industrial factories that were mining various materials. So it's a very polluted site as well. And as a result, the Owens Valley is one of the largest, I think it's the largest emitter in the United States of fine particulate dust. And it may be actually the largest in the world. It's one of the largest in the world. And this dust is highly carcinogenic. It's so there's cancer clusters all around the Owens Lake. So it's a human health and environmental disaster, what has been done. So this is the site, again, where we're actually developing this film, is taking something that is essentially like an ecological disaster site and turning it into a landscape with agency, with photochemical agency, and kind of giving voice to that landscape in a strange way.
And also, like, the bacteria sort of brings me to the next question. We were talking about it yesterday, like, have you started to work with fungi in photochemical processes?
Yeah. So that's kind of the next frontier. We've been doing that really since the pandemic. We started working with fungal prints, where we're actually inoculating the prints and allowing the fungus to sort of colonize the print and digest the print in different ways.
What is digested? The gelatin?
So the way that a lot of fungi work is that they essentially are like, we have stomachs on the inside. They're kind of like inside out. So they secrete all of their digestive enzymes on the outside around them, and then they absorb the nutrients. So they're like external stomachs. And so we have a number of different processes we've been experimenting with, but it turns out that you can inoculate these prints in such a way that those digestive enzymes actually start kind of melting and distorting the image. And so we get these prints that, where the black and white silver content actually starts moving around and flowing in the gelatin, and you get these kind of these bizarre kind of traces as the fungi kind of digest the emulsion. And then in other cases, we can actually inoculate the print in such a way that they actually start to form more like fruiting bodies, like mushrooms, like fungi that you would see growing on trees, for example, that can actually erupt out of the image and start getting involved in the picture.
It's like a living image, actually,
yes.
by itself.
So once you dry them, the fungi go dormant, and they no longer are spreading. So this is probably like an archivist's nightmare, but we create these almost like they're almost like petri dishes in a way, and then you can you can stop the growth, and as long as they're kept dry, they are totally stable. They will just remain.
I love the idea of the living image that is sort of changing itself the whole time.
Yeah.
In opposition to what images were created, like what photography was created to do actually is to freeze something.
Yeah.
But if it develops itself, or keeps on developing, it's actually a really different approach towards
and I think
the understanding of time as well.
Absolutely, and I think that often a lot of our processes are embracing kind of decay and letting decay come back into the process. Usually, in a art practice or in an archive, death and decay of the image is like the worst, is the thing that we fear, because we do everything to preserve. And so we've done a lot of experimental methods with, for example, soaking, leaving our photographs soaking in shallow pools of water and then letting them dry up, like the way that the lake bed dried up, and watching the way that the emulsion cracks and shrinks and sort of distorts. And so, again, introducing and, in fact, encouraging this kind of decay to come into the photographic process and be part of the image.
Seen historically, like with the introduction of social media, I don't know if you've heard of this book, The Social Image. It's basically suggesting that social media is now, today, is what photography, as a mass medium, is what photography used to be at the turn of the last century. Like the immediate apprehensiveness of time, basically, and the preservance of that, and yet it has a very ephemeral quality to it in its digitalness, and like the question of preserving time and imaging is constantly changing. And now sometimes you get the impression that photographers have now a problem because everybody can take pictures like they used to do, or
right.
like they were asked to do. So
sure.
now you might be at a point where photography, like painting,
sure.
at the turn of the last century, can
sure.
sort of turn to its own essence.
Yes, exactly.
And I had, like, when I was reading first about your works, and now seeing them and talking to you, it feels like you're quite at the essence of its own structure.
Yes.
How do you feel that saying that you're not a photographer yourself? Which is quite interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're speaking my language for sure. I mean, I think to return to your point, I've often, meditated on this same kind of historical trajectory. In the 1860s, even 1840s, 50s, in the early days of photography, there was a lot of anxiety about photography essentially being the end of art, essentially. That, much like Chat GPT or these AI algorithms, people have this anxiety that now we are going to be replaced by a technology. And you are indeed correct that what photography ended up doing was liberating painting from being the workhorse, painting and drawing and the kind of human-made art, liberated it from the drudgery of being the workhorse of everyday representation. So in, pre-photography, painting was required for portraiture, for religious images, for depicting historical scenes. And now photography can kind of take that place. And painting was liberated to, increasing sort of abstraction and experiments in form and concept and structure. And yeah, absolutely. We are now at a similar juncture with photography. I like what Walter Benjamin talked about. He was speaking about the activity of the collector, but he said that in the collector liberates things from the drudgery of being useful. And I often turn to that as kind of like a rough working definition in a way of artwork. In a strange way, it's often the things that we deem as being art are modes of representation that have been liberated from the drudgery of being useful. And I think this is where now it becomes an intentional thing. If you actually go to the trouble to shoot a roll of film and develop it, that's already saying something. And part of that is that the medium is no longer invisible. If you shoot a photograph in the 1960s or 70s, it's not really saying anything because it's just taken for granted that of course you shot a photograph because that's how we make images. And now it's actually has some signifying value, just the act of making a photograph. But yeah, you said some things about social media as well, and time. And absolutely, I think that, photography also serves this function as being like an external memory. And I think that might be what you were kind of exploring, is this idea of photography as an external memory has only accelerated, so that now, it's almost like, I think FOMO isn't even quite the right term. I think that there's a fear of not photographing. So now people feel like if they don't document an experience, or document themselves having an experience, it will be as if they didn't have that experience. And so that's a kind of an acceleration. And I think it's, differences in degree become differences in kind. And it may very well be an extension of something that was already present in the 19th century, but I think in this evolution and in this acceleration, we have something that has become a new creature. And it does have to do with that relationship to time. And people do ask me often, why would you make these photographs? Why would you go to the trouble to develop photographs? Is it better in some way? Is it higher, resolution? Or why do you build these giant cameras? Because I'm always making things difficult and building these massive cameras and working in these massive formats. But it's not about the end result. That's the key. It's about how you get there. And I think that's the piece that humans, or at least we in this time and place and culture, it seems that we tend to forget about the process. And, as you can see, a lot of my work is very focused on process. How you get from A to B is really, that's life, right?
Exactly.
That's where life happens. And so, I think there's a huge mistake that people have made. It's like, as soon as we invent a new, kind of digital printing, we throw away all the lithography stones, and we throw away all the letterpress prints, and we throw away, and then again, back to this like drudgery of being useful, like it's like clockwork. And as soon as we're done throwing away all of the lithography, suddenly about 10 years later, it becomes an art form, and everybody's looking for those stones again and trying to pull them out of the trash. So this is part of the role of art, right? Is we take the detritus of the march of progress, and then we repurpose these cast-off technologies, and we repurpose them for imagining something new.
There is like a huge backlash happening right now that people actually also return in general to analog photography because they find out, like the colors, you can have like no digital image can ever look like that,
right,
and stuff like that. And also like the attempt of social media or the phones to recreate things that look old. Like you have all those filters that give them the images you take with your phone,
right,
the quality of a Polaroid image, which is is interesting because like the old has a different significance to it. Like it's more real because it's bound to matter, and like the matter aspect of photography these days, I think the human relation to matter is changing because it has to, in a way, because everything becomes more ephemeral. Like you cannot touch, smell, or see an algorithm.
Yes.
Or anything, but it's so entangled with your life already. There is no life without the internet anymore.
Right.
And so you have a longing for things that sort of give you a sensation.
I think though that I mean, that's what we're told, right? We're constantly told that there's no life without the internet. But the reality is that we still have access to this, which is this present moment. And we forget that so easily. And that's not anything new, you know. This is like, this is a tale as old as time, really, that humans get wrapped up in essentially their own imaginations, their own simulations, their own stories. And you don't need social media to have rumors that snowball and become new realities that we all live in. You know, humans have been creating these psychological spaces since the beginning of human culture and language. And so that head trip that we get wrapped up in is essentially a human struggle. And I think for me, I mean, I guess we've swerved into the metaphysical, I guess, spiritual dimensions. But I think there is something about that present moment, and that we getting people to slow down and to question what they're seeing, question, you know, like we were saying earlier in the conversation, you were talking about the experience of being in a new city. We all have had that experience of seeing something with fresh eyes, and it's like the first time again, or and that's an experience that we all have access to. And to me, as an artist, that's actually one of the places that I like to reside. That's and that's what I hope to share with people, because I mean, as kind of mundane or simple as it may sound, I think that is actually inherently radical. Being present, inviting people to step into the present with all of its possibility for reinterpretation, for reimagining what we know, what we don't know. There's slippage in this present moment, and there's immense potential. And so that's where I see it. You know, the present moment is always inherently radical.